Hello, listeners. We will continue the story of the Darwin Project Level 3 this week, and things are beginning to ramp up as the group enters into the main section of this level, finding things that seem familiar to some of our past research. It makes me wonder if Simon was right. Maybe each reality is connected. Just something to think about, I guess. But for this episode, there will not be a conclusion. The file itself is just too large. But I assure you, Part 3 will come to a bloody, disgusting end. Before we begin though, I would like to remind everyone that we have bonus episodes up on Patreon, and we are even thinking about having our unpaid intern do some extra work. Sort of a behind-the-scenes type of thing for all of our interdimensional travelers. And yes, we understand that he is odd. But if he can do well there, maybe we can start to think about giving him some monetary handouts. But if Patreon isn't your thing, we are on all the social platforms. So find the one that you enjoy the most and give us a follow to stay in the loop. Or even just chat with us. We would love to hear from you. Now enough of this idle chit-chat. Strap in tight. The trials are about to begin.
James and Alice strode through the wooden double doors to catch up with Rebecca. The room they entered into was grand. The first thing James noticed was a massive chandelier hanging above them. It appeared to be made of gold and held what seemed like hundreds of candles, and it did its job well, lighting the interior foyer, leaving minimal spaces that were cast in shadows. The decorative marble flooring shone white with black swirls, glittering ever so often as the candlelight danced across the flooring. Ornate and well-kept vintage sofas, desks, and stone carvings decorated the room. Everything was pristine, almost as if someone had meticulously cleaned the area daily. James spotted Rebecca standing at the far end of the room, where two large curved staircases made their way up to the second level of what James was now understanding to be a mansion.
Rebecca. Hey, Rebecca!
He called out as he approached her, but she didn't move. He noticed that she seemed to be transfixed, looking up at the second floor. He followed her line of sight, and his brows furrowed in confusion. A painting was affixed to the wall. It depicted an open field filled with flowers of a species he had never seen before. And the sky was gray, almost as if an approaching storm was on its way. Two women in flowing sundresses stood together, hand in hand, the foliage creeping up to their knees. And they were staring off into the distance, at pure nothingness. The painting itself seemed to fade to black, but what perplexed James more was that in the darkness of the canvas, he swore he saw faces. And they moved, screaming, crying, laughing, and any other emotion you can imagine. A hand touches his shoulder, and he jumped in fright.
Jesus, Alice. You scared me.
Well, sorry for that. I've been calling both your names for some time now, and neither of you have moved. What is it that you see in this painting that has you both so transfixed?
I'm not sure, but I swear that I can see faces in the darkness of this painting.
Well, that is odd. I only see black paint. Lovely painting, though. That were it so large, I would want it hung in my flat. Now, what about her? She seems to be in a whole other world right now.
James gave her a soft smile and moved towards Rebecca, placing his hand on her shoulder. Like him, she jumped and turned as if in a daze.
Hey, sorry. I don't know what's going on.
It's okay. Let's get out of this room. There's something really fucked up about that painting.
Rebecca nodded her head and began to turn back to once again look into the painting. James gently put his hand on her cheek and pulled her away.
Rebecca, we need to go. This doesn't seem like the place we want to be standing in all night.
But the faces. In the shadows. Did you see the faces? I swear mine was in there.
Yeah, I saw them. But we need to go.
James grabbed her by the hand and pulled her towards Alice. A concerned look fell upon her face, and James just nodded at her. The two speaking without saying a word.
Okay, let's get out of this room and go down that hall over there.
You mean the pitch-black hall with zero lighting?
Yeah, we can grab one of those oil lamps on the table over there. It should give us enough visibility to find a room.
If you insist. I bloody hate the dark, though. You can never tell what's lurking in there.
James didn't say anything. He handed Rebecca over to Alice and walked over to a table that held 2 glass oil lamps. They were already lit, as if prepared for them. He grabbed the one nearest to him and beckoned for the women to follow him. He watched as Rebecca shook her head back and forth as if trying to wipe away the fog that clouded her mind. Alice leaning in and whispering something to her, more than likely affirming words of encouragement. And like coming out of a dream, James saw her become her normal, stoic self once again. The hard-set eyes, the confident gait in her steps, and with a deep breath, the whole of Rebecca was back.
All right, Mr. James. She seems to be fit for travel once again. So, into the darkness we go.
James stepped into the hallway, the oil lamp barely illuminating the corridor and seemingly dying out mere feet in front of them. But it was better than nothing. And while they wouldn't be able to see what was in front of them until it was too late, he carried on. The 2 women followed behind him in silence, the only sound being that of their footfalls on the marble flooring below. As the group moved forwards, the faint sound of a grandfather clock could be heard. James wasn't sure if the sound had been there all along, and he was just now noticing it, or if the clock was somewhere nearby, potentially indicating that they were nearing a junction or the end of the hallway itself. The ticking grew louder with every step, echoing off the bare walls and hard floor. A strange feeling set in James's stomach, a mixture between nausea and anxious butterflies. He did his best to shake it off, but as they approached, and as the ticking of the clock grew louder, the feeling escalated. He turned to the women, noticing the fear and discomfort on Rebecca's face, and the fear and flightiness on Alice's.
James, I think we should turn back. Whatever is down this way is messing with me. I feel like I'm going to get sick.
Yes. I feel like that incessant ticking is turning my insides out, and I'm not completely sure why. But I want to run away, to get as far away from this noise as possible.
I agree. Damn it. Let's get the hell out of here.
A thunderous chime exploded through the hall, bringing with it a rush of air that knocked them to the ground. Another chime, and another burst of air. The 3 curled in the fetal position, clutching their heads and screaming as the clock chimed on. More and more blasts of noise, and the resulting shockwave hammering every sense of their body. James could feel it. He could see the air as it rolled past them like a jet plane. He could smell the air that seemed to burn into ozone, seeping into his taste buds with a burnt metallic taste. and the noise, it shook his body so violently he thought it would turn his blood into hydrolyzed oil. Alice rolled to her side and expelled the contents of her stomach, the burning feel of stomach bile destroying her esophagus as it came up. She began to sob as each blast wreaked havoc on her. Rebecca could do nothing more than scream, and it angered her. She felt so damned defenseless, weak, and fragile. Another chime and rush of air blew past them. The room grew still. There was no more ticking, no more blasts of air, and that feeling of sickness and fear was beginning to fade away. James sat up groggily, as if waking from a night's-long bender. His head was pounding, and his body felt as heavy as lead. He heard sobbing behind him. Locating the lantern, he grabbed it and turned to Alice curled up, crying in a pile of green and clear bile, her short blonde hair beginning to mix in with it and form together in clumps. Rebecca was next to her, rubbing her back and telling her that everything was okay. Sniffling and raising up to her forearms, Alice wiped her mouth clean and brushed away her tears.
Sorry. I just really hate throwing up.
Oh, me too. I cry every time. Here, let's get you up and maybe find something to clean back out of your hair.
Oh no. Did I get it in my hair? Damn it all. Now it's going to be slopping up against me and I'm going to have to smell it.
Alice gagged at the thought.
Do you happen to have a hair tie, Rebecca? I know my hair is pretty short, but I can still get it in a tight pony.
Not currently, but maybe we can find something to put your hair up.
James stood and walked over to the women, helping them to their feet.
Sorry about that, Mr. James. I'm usually not that weak. But throwing up sort of does me and then makes me feel like a child again.
Hey, no worries at all. I hate it too, and I usually can't even stand up once I'm done. So that says something about your willpower, right?
She gave him a soft smile and patted his shoulder.
I can see why she stuck with you. You're a good person, Mr. James.
The scream, coming from the direction they entered the hallway, made James's hairs stand on his arms, and a chill ran down his spine. That wasn't the scream of a monster or a giant spider. That was the scream of death. As if on cue, the sounds of speakers crackling to life and the familiar voice of the game master filled the hallway.
6 contestants left. 1 solo, 1 group of 2, and 1 group of 3. The fun is just starting.
I really do hate that man.
Yeah, you're telling me.
Let's get moving. Whatever happened had to have taken place in the room we just left. And I don't want to find out what killed whoever that was.
Good idea. Let's get going.
The group moved further down the hall, and as they did, a rectangular silhouette could be seen standing up against the wall. James strained his eyes trying to make out what the object was, and as they cautiously approached, he was able to determine that it was the biggest grandfather clock he had ever seen. It had to have been 8 feet tall, and he was sure that even if he stretched his arms out as wide as he could, he wouldn't be able to touch both sides. He also noticed that the clock was no longer working, and that the front glass door was open and slowly moving back and forth, almost as if someone had bumped it when they passed by, or if something had just come out of the clock itself. He held his hand up to stop the group from moving any closer.
What is it?
The clock up there. I'm not too sure, but I think something has come out of it.
What?
The door of it is moving back and forth, and to me that can only mean 2 things. Someone bumped it when they went by, or...
Some big beastly monster standing 8 feet tall came out of that thing.
Yeah, and given what we have gone through, I'm going with the latter.
Where did it go then? It had 3 directions to travel, and luckily it missed our hallway. James, can you see if there are footprints or anything?
James crept up to the clock, peering at the ground and taking cautious glances to his left and to his right. He shook his head, and his shoulders slumped.
The floors are all clean, and there isn't a way for me to tell which way it went.
50-50 it is then.
Should we vote on it?
James froze. The noise coming from his left, the sound like that of an unintended heavy footstep of an animal stalking its prey. He peered into the darkness, moving the oil lamp further out, and he saw it, or at least a piece of it, moving away from the light and folding back into the shadows. A woman, her skin porcelain white and eyes that shimmered ruby red within the light of the lamp. And he wasn't completely sure, but he could have sworn that she was wearing no clothing. The image of her quickly fading from his mind, all except for the look on her face. The sinister smirk of knowing, of letting herself be seen by him just enough to fuck with his head.
What is it? Do you see something?
I do. I'm afraid to move.
What is it?
A woman. Something isn't right about her.
Well, we have to do something. We can't just stay here.
Another scream erupted down the corridor they just came from, followed by the sound of heavy footfalls. Someone was running, not at them in particular, but rather for their life.
Run!
James flung the oil lamp into the darkness, where he saw the woman as Alice and Rebecca sprinted down the opposite hall behind him. He watched as the glass hit the ground, shattering into hundreds of pieces, the oil dispersing and catching fire, the flames spreading and illuminating the hall. And standing within the flames, her eyes locked on his, was the woman. Her face hard set, and her eyes telling him that she wanted him, to tear him apart and feast on his marrow, to scoop out his eyes and chew on them like overripe grapes. The thought hit James so hard, he could have sworn she projected the images of her doing these exact things to him. As if in recognition, she gave him a full, toothy smile. And that is when James noticed the 1.5-inch fangs. James turned to run just as he was barreled into by whomever was running for their life down the hall. His body slammed up against the giant grandfather clock, knocking the wind out of him. Clambering to his feet and gasping for air, he noticed that the person on the ground was the man he had saved earlier in level 2. His eyes wide in fear as he stared down the darkened corridor he just exited, acting as if James wasn't even there. James looked back up to the woman in the flames, that same smile on her face and her breathing becoming heavier. He could feel her hunger, her need to feed, and both these men were prime targets. The flames around her were beginning to die out, the orange and yellow light they produced dancing across the woman's exposed body. The burn marks and charred skin healing instantly, as if no damage was ever done to her. His breath now regained, James reached out and dragged the man to his feet. His eyes were crazed, looking every which way. James peered behind him and saw the woman take a delicate step forward, and then another.
We have to run. Hey, can you hear me? We have to run or we will die.
James swung back and slapped the man across his face, and it seemed to do the trick. The man, clarity seemingly coming from nowhere, nodded at James. And that was the last thing he ever did. In the blink of an eye, the man's head was removed from his body, the arterial spray pumping up and out of his exposed neck like a fountain, painting the walls, the clock, and even James in hot, viscous fluid. Behind him stood the woman, holding his head high in the air and sucking at the blood falling from his ragged neck. It poured down her chin in sheets, dripping to the floor and covering her body. James screamed and threw the remainder of the man at her, hoping that it would keep her occupied while he made his escape. Running now down the hall, the same way the two women had, James pushed his body to the limits, stealing glances behind him and seeing the woman hunched over the lifeless body of the man, draining every last ounce of the blood from him while peering directly into James's eyes, as if telling him that this was soon to be his fate. The last flickers of flame extinguished, and he was once again bathed in darkness, his pace down the hall constant. He had no inclination on how fast this woman could move or what tricks she may possess. The lore on these things was all over the place, and there was no way of knowing what these sick fucks did and what type of fucking vampire they made. He felt hands grip him from behind, stopping his forward pace. James fell to the ground hard. She caught him. She fucking caught him. It was over. He was soon going to be this monster's next meal. His scream cut off as a hand covered his mouth. With a heave, he was quickly dragged from the corridor and into a dark room, the door shutting slowly behind him. The loudspeaker crackled to life.
Looks like we're down another contestant, folks. Bringing our number to a happy little 5. Only 2 more to die, and this nightmare can end. Have fun out there.
Keep it down there, Boyle. See, we don't want those devils up there finding us now, do we?
Thank you for listening and supporting this podcast. If you would like access to the interdimensional radio station, you can search for the Nightmare Trials on Patreon. Once there, it is only $2 per month to gain access to our extra short stories and chat discussion with the professor. Your contribution helps us continue to do what we do. Further, you can go to the nightmaretrials.square.site and order merch and suggest to be a part of one of our stories. We would love nothing more than to add your name to our writings. Lastly, make sure to follow the podcast and hit the notification button so you never miss an episode. Until we meet again,